Ever scratch your head at car industry decisions, wondering if automakers are really listening? We do too. That's why we jumped at the chance to sit down with the CEO of SBD Automotive at CES. They're the experts guiding the industry towards smarter, safer, and greener cars. And guess what? They just launched 4S Mobility, a game-changing initiative to put people, society, and the planet back in the driver's seat. Buckle up. This is interesting.
Well, now we have a special treat. We're going to sit down, or we're sitting down with Andrew Hart with SBD Automotive. So if you'd like to introduce, first of all, yourself, but also SBD Automotive, because we only barely learned about it the past couple of weeks.
I know. We're not generally known outside of kind of a group of car companies that work with us, but we work primarily with car companies, helping them make decisions around technology, which is really hard at the moment because technology is changing so quickly. So we normally work with their engineering teams, with their product planning teams, to help them through that process of deciding what to do when it comes to in-car technology, and then how to do it and who to work with, all the way through to launching it into the market.
That's really cool. And what is your background? I also want to make sure you get introduced.
So I'm an engineer by profession, but I was never a very good one. So I went straight from doing mechanical engineering into joining SBD. I joined for 1 year originally, but really liked it. And it was just at that time that the industry was going into connected cars. And for me, it was super exciting. You know, all this new technology coming out, and being able to do exciting new things in the car, it just kept me hooked in. So even though I'm not naturally a car guy, I've ended up spending the last 20 years in the car industry.
Now, you're talking about like making the decisions about the technology going into cars. I think for some of us, like we just see the technology and it's like, yes, we want it all. But there's way more to it. I mean, of course, there's cost, but there's also like, what benefit does it give the consumer? So how do you help them make those decisions?
I think the first thing to understand is, you know, as consumers, we see the finished products, and it looks like it's just been brought together, and you think it's a fairly smooth process to do that. Car companies have been making cars for over 100 years now, right? So they know how to make the car bit, but the technology bit that sits on top of the car is quite new to them. So whilst when it comes to cars, they have a lot of good processes, you know, they can make sure there's really good quality, make sure that it's delivered on time at a good price point. When you start introducing more and more software, it gets harder and harder.
Right.
And these companies aren't software companies. They're typically metal companies, right? They throw bits of metal together.
They're learning quickly.
They're learning quickly because they're having to, right? You've got companies like Tesla that have shown that you can do a lot with software, and that you can create a lot of value, but it's still quite alien to them. So what we typically do is help them through that process, starting with the consumer, because I think it always has to start with us as consumers. What do we really need and what do we really want? And those things are different, right? Sometimes what we need isn't what we want isn't necessarily what we need, and making sure you get that right balance is really important. Otherwise you end up with kind of technology for the sake of technology, and that's what engineers are very good at. Right, we love technology. We'll kind of do things because it can be done.
We'll add one more widget.
Exactly. The key is to kind of try and hold that back a little bit and say, well, yes, we can do that, but do we really need to do that? Does the customer really want to do that? And that's tricky.
And it seems like over the past few years, there's been sort of like this push and pull over like how many buttons versus how many functions in a touch screen. And I think some companies are very, very far, like Tesla, it's like everything's in a touch screen. But there are some companies, I think Hyundai has talked about like we're pulling back, we're going to put more buttons based off of our owners.
That's been a really interesting kind of cycle, hasn't it?
It really has.
This dichotomy. The irony is that Tesla originally, one of the reasons why they took out all the buttons was cost.
Right.
It saved them about $20, $25 per car to be able to strip the buttons out and create one piece.
Adds up quickly.
It does, yeah. And at that point, they were really struggling to make the car affordable. They didn't have the levels of profit that they do now. And so I'd say it was more of a financial decision that actually ended up really resonating with the early Tesla buyers. I think for a lot of car companies, they've seen that and gone, oh, if it's good enough for Tesla owners, it should be good enough for our customers. The reality isn't so simple. Right. There's a lot of different types of car owners with a lot of different needs, and they don't always match. So, a Subaru driver isn't the same as a Tesla owner.
Right.
And you need to be able to kind of adapt a little bit based on what's right for your customer, their age range, their likes, their dislikes, their comfort around technology, and not just jump on a bandwagon because Tesla's done it.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, even like within the same automotive family, like we've been in a GMC Hummer recently.
Yeah.
In a Chevy Equinox, which we just leased. And it's like basically the same system, but they're the way the interface looks as well as the buttons. You have we got to have a rugged button in a Hummer. And that's what people expect.
Exactly. And that's one of the biggest challenges that big groups like VW, like GM, like Stellantis, who own Ram and some of those, they face, is because they want to bring technology to a group level, but the brands are saying, no, our customers are different. They want this, they want that. And there's this kind of friction and tension between the group and the brands when it comes to technology.
Yeah.
And so, there are a lot of battles that go into making your car that often don't get kind of seen.
And I'm assuming part of the advantage of like working with SBD Automotive is that you're not just necessarily like, if Ford is going to go out and get data, they're going to get data probably from a lot of Ford customers.
Yes.
But you guys could take a look at not only just like a U.S. perspective, but like a global perspective, and look at what the trends are and what people are expecting in their next car.
Yeah, and it's how do you kind of connect that with competitor data, with regulations playing a big role now, with technology trends from inside and outside of the industry, and bring that all together. But the big challenge is there's too much happening, there's too much information. So a lot of what we do is actually, how do you filter out that noise and say, ignore all of this because it's not that important, but this particular change in the market is important to you because your customers need this, and you want to be able to achieve that, therefore focus on this. And focus is the hardest thing, I would say, to do for companies right now.
Well, it's it's easy to sit there and just go like, let's just add this, or let's go to CES. Look at that, we're going to put that in our car. But we actually first met at the breakfast that you guys hosted the other day, and I thought it was really great. It was sort of like, let's boil things down to the basics, and it was 4S mobility.
Yes.
Let me see if I can get it. Safety, seamless, sustainability, and secure.
You got it, right? Yes. That's really good.
The secure was, But it really is, it's sort of interesting because like we think about like all of these like minute decisions that people have to make when they're coming up with the next car. And it's like this feature or that feature. But really you can sort of boil it down. If it's not falling into those categories, if it doesn't benefit me, the consumer, in one of those categories, maybe it shouldn't be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the challenge is that there are always trade-offs to make.
Right.
And so these things sometimes conflict with each other, right? You could have the most secure car in the world if you just built a brick wall around it and never let anyone in, but that wouldn't be very seamless. You could actually have a really sustainable car that wasn't very safe. And if you look at some of the electric vehicles now, they're getting heavier. It's creating more problems when it comes to crashes. And so there is a natural friction between these. I think the important thing is to make sure that the decisions that are being taken are being done in the right way and with full understanding of the impact that it has on other parts of those different S's.
Right.
And that's why we set up this initiative, was to say, typically within a car company, you would have a safety team. All they care about is safety.
Right.
And you get the security team, all they care about is security. And they're both right. What they're pushing for in terms of improvements are important. But because they don't have a common language across all of the different outcomes that matter to customers, it ends up being quite political and quite difficult and quite slow.
Who wins this battle?
Exactly.
Who has the loudest boss?
Yeah. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is create that common language that allows these different teams, and also allows them to talk with other teams outside of their business, the partners, everything else, to make sure that they're putting the customer first.
Yeah. And I thought it was really interesting because you guys have done some recent studies and surveys globally.
Yes.
And I thought it was really interesting. So like, Liv's from South Africa. So it was like safety is like a big priority in South Africa, less so here, which, typically it's like, it's still a big priority here, but you don't think about it because it's not.
No, you take more for granted, don't you?
Yeah.
You kind of assume that your car's going to keep you safe and that you are safe on the roads, rightly or wrongly, because accidents in the US have been going up quite a lot.
Exactly.
So maybe that will change.
But it was also really interesting seeing like one of the common things is, and it's sort of like being in Southern California where we're at, we think of cars, that's our freedom.
Yeah.
And it really, we think of it as there, but it's sort of globally. It's like a global thing. It's like that.
Many markets see it. And I think that's one of the kind of trade-offs that we make as humanity is that we want that freedom, right? And it does create a lot of challenges when it comes to congestion, pollution, all these different things. But we want the freedom. What we need to learn as an industry is how do we give people that freedom whilst trying to take as many of the trade-offs away as possible.
Right.
And make sure that we don't sacrifice, the safety, the security of others because we have cars.
Yeah.
And that again is important for the car companies to come together and think about that. Because if we're not careful, and we're seeing this in some markets, people will fall out of love with their cars.
Right.
And if we get to that point, the car industry isn't going to be competing against each other or against Chinese car companies. They're going to be competing against other modes of transport that people connect with more. And younger people in our surveys generally had less affection, less connection with their cars.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a wake-up call.
Yeah, no, just anecdotally, like we've talked to people, and for me, it's like when I was 19 and 20, it's like I wanted to just hop in my car. Like on a great weekend, it was like I'm just going to go for a drive. That was my weekend goal.
Yeah.
And now, like younger generations, they don't even care. It's like a scenic drive. Why would I want to go do that?
They got their digital world.
Yeah.
They're kind of quite comfortable. And one of the survey results was we asked people, is it getting easier for you to do everything that you want to do without leaving the house? And again, the difference between old and young was massive. Younger people just feel like it's perfectly convenient just to stay at home.
Yeah.
And if they do go out, it needs to be for something special, an experience or something that's going to kind of really engage them. It's not for the routine stuff.
Yeah.
They can get stuff delivered, they get stuff delivered.
Yeah, it's really interesting, like how all of these factors come into play. And I mean, we've all purchased cars. We all know, like we have to have the checkbox of safety and security and whatever features, but it's still sort of like making, what all of these data points and numbers, it still has to like strike that passion. So how do you help the automotive makers like do that? Like take data from surveys and then translate that into a car that somebody's going to be passionate enough about to spend thousands of dollars.
Yeah. I think the first precursor to that is that every car company needs to have a very strong sense of purpose, and a very strong brand identity. And they need to know what they stand for, because there's so many customers out there with so many different needs that if you're just trying to kind of make customers happy, you can end up spreading yourself too thin and losing some of that identity. So if you look at Volvo, who was on stage with us at the event, the former CEO of Volvo, Håkan Samuelsson, he talked about, at Volvo, decisions were always made through the lens of safety. That was their identity. And they never had to have kind of difficult conversations of doing the right thing, because it was ingrained in people's minds. It's like, of course we're going to do this in a safe way. Yes, they had constraints when it came to cost and quality and things like that, but they managed those because they had that strong sense of purpose. I think what we then see is, and part of the role that we play is, how do you then manage everything else and all the other thousands of decisions that need to be made? They need more of a framework to help them organize those decisions, because it is becoming a non-stop firefighting epic battle within many car companies. Like you'd be horrified to see kind of how much is just kind of decided quite kind of on the go, kind of quite tactically. And like I said, when it came to launching cars, they had good processes. When it comes to launching technology, they don't. They're having to relearn certain skills.
It's a challenging dynamic, and I see it too. Like we talk a lot about we're transitioning to electrification. But really, it's sort of like I see, the auto industry's gone through transformations in the past. But this time, I see it as extremely difficult because there's two different transformations. It's not only electrifications, but it's the software-defined vehicle, which seems to be the buzzword this year, beyond AI for cars. Do you see like how the car manufacturers are adapting to doing both at the same time?
It is a double whammy. It's really hitting them hard because they're investing heavily into both of those areas. But they're almost having to run two companies in parallel at the moment. They're
Right.
old company,
right?
Which still makes combustion engines, which still makes them a lot of money, and that's still required in many different places for many different people across the world. But they're also having to set up a whole new business that is electrified, that is software defined, and that's really tanking their profit. So a lot of the problems that they're having, in parallel to that, Chinese car companies are coming in much quicker, much cheaper, and that's eating into their market share. So there's a bit of a sense of crisis in the car industry right now, and a bit of a survivalist, kind of Darwinian type of feel to it right now.
Yeah, it's a scary thing, and I just saw a headline pop up this morning as I got up, and it was basically saying the Chinese companies were at CES and everyone should be scared, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes when you're backed into a corner, you have to innovate, and I think that's what's going to happen in the industry. At least that's what I hope, and hopefully they're going to use good data, focus on the customer, and not introduce features that we really don't want, or do away with all buttons because they think that's what we want.
And that's the risk. Is I think fear can be a good driver for change. It can also sometimes drive the wrong behaviors, because if you're backed up against the wall, you start kind of lashing out and trying different things that maybe aren't rooted in what customers really want. They're rooted in what competitors are doing. So that's the kind of difficult balance that they're having to find right now, is speed up, but in the right direction.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that I thought was really cool about the 4S mobility is you're doing it like in an open source fashion.
Yeah.
So you're not like, we're going to get this data, we're going to like lock it away, and if you want to give us, a lot of money, you can take a look at the data. Basically anyone, even consumers, can come and take a look.
We want everyone to do it. We want everyone to look at it. Consumers, universities, anyone that can look at that data and find new meaning from it, I think is a win. And for us, we've invited competitors, we've invited, other partners across the ecosystem, because ultimately we need to win as an industry at some level.
Right.
If we're so focused on short-term competing against each other, we might wake up in a few years' time and find out that no one's buying cars anymore.
Yeah.
And they're not doing that because we haven't built cars that really connect with them.
Yeah. And I we're sort of new to automotive in general terms, because we've started covering, when we bought our Mach-E 4 years ago. So we're sort of new to automotive industry, and to me it's been interesting watching. There is, of course, a lot of competitiveness, but there's also a little bit of like we're sort of in this together. So it's really interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. What made you buy your Mach-E? Or what did you have before?
Well, I had a Subaru WRX.
Okay, yeah.
I think it was by law. I lived in Colorado. You have to have a Subaru, right?
The big love.
But I literally, I sort of came from a Ford family. I sort of joke, I came home from the hospital in a Mustang.
Amazing.
When I was born, my mom had a 65 Mustang. I'm sure my dad drove us home in a Fairlane, another Ford product. So I sort of grew up in a Mustang family, and like everybody in my family's owned a Mustang, except for me. And I just sort of, I thought it like passed me by, like I was never going to own a Mustang, because, in my 40s, now 50s, a two-door Mustang I still would love to have, but just budget-wise, doesn't suit my lifestyle. And it really intrigued me that they were trying to take that Mustang branding, but not just make it branding, like give the Mustang some of that soul and that characteristics. And it's one of the features, like, I don't know if you even describe it as a feature, but when we're driving, and Liv talks about this a lot, like, because she films, as we're driving down the road, the hood is like iconic.
It is.
It's long hood, curvy hood, and we've driven a lot of EVs, and it's like those design elements, and it just feels good. So
it's got a good personality. I've always felt, compared to kind of the trend towards almost dumbing down the personality of electric vehicles and only focusing on software, it came out, and I thought, that's a good looking car.
And that's what I'm noticing, and what I appreciate now. It seems like the OEM, the legacy manufacturers that have a long-standing tradition of making cars, and now they're electrifying their lineup. It seems like they are doing a better job of putting their stamp of what an electrified Nissan looks like, what an electrified Porsche looks like. And I think it's really exciting.
It is important, yeah.
And the thing is like, you know, a lot of people are like, we're all just going to buy Teslas. Tesla's going to dominate. But I like to remind them of like how many car companies there are, how many car models there are.
Yeah.
And even, you know, for years, you'd have like a Chevy, but then you'd have the Cadillac version, which slight differences, but sort of a different market.
Yeah.
Like we all want our different choices. There's a lot of room for a lot of companies.
I think so. Yeah, I agree. And that's why I think it's such an exciting time, because companies are going to be experimenting in different ways.
Yeah.
And that always leads to better results for customers too, eventually. Yeah. You know, it will lead to some short-term pain, but we'll get through it.
Yeah. I mean, some may not survive. I hope they do. I mean, I see positives in all the brands.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited. And here at CES, there's a lot of great stuff on show.
Yeah.
I was really excited to see Scout.
I know, they were
another
really
retro brand being brought back. So it's really amazing to see.
And they have a really strong sense of identity, like talking to their teams.
Yeah.
They're very proud of the heritage but also bringing in a different way of thinking. And they said to me, look, there are so many companies out there trying to be another Tesla. We don't want to be that. Like we want software to be important, but we also want lots of other things to be important. We want it to be configurable. We want it to be rugged. We want it to be all these different things. So it was nice to hear, you know, them carving their own path.
Yeah, it's nice to see. I think we've moved past the phase of like everybody's trying to come up with the Tesla killer.
Yeah.
Now they're just like, hey, we just need our slice, and we're going to differentiate ourselves from Tesla instead of trying to copy them.
Yeah, you be you, right?
Right. Right. Well, if you have anything else, feel free to just drop that. But
no, thank you very much.
Otherwise, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I could talk for hours.
I know.
All right. Thanks again.
Thanks for joining us for this video where we learned about SBD Automotive and 4S Mobility. Be sure to check the description if you'd like access to all the nerdy data that they're making available for free. And let us know your thoughts down below. A huge thank you to our patrons for their support, as well as our YouTube members too. Your support helps us attend awesome events like CES and cover topics like this. Let us know if there are any other topics that you want to see covered. And just remember that whatever you drive, whether you know the data on it or not, enjoy the ride. Bye!